All right, if you have a Bible, open up to Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, there's a bunch of Bibles in the chairs in front of you, I hope. If you don't know your Bible, it's to the right. Go to the middle and start working right. You'll get to Matthew, Mark, and then the book of Luke. It's a third of the four Gospels. We are in a long study in Luke. We started in December. We will finish in April. So it's quite pronounced. Let's read our passage this morning in Luke chapter 11, starting in verse 1. It happened that while Jesus was praying in a certain place, after he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John also taught his disciples," that being John the Baptist. And he said to them, "When you pray, pray like this: Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves also forgive everyone who is indebted to us, and lead us not into temptation." Then he said to them, "Suppose one of you has a friend, and goes to him at midnight and says to him, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine has come to me from a journey, and I have nothing to set before him.' And from inside he answers and says, 'Do not bother me, the door has already been shut, and my children and I are in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything.' I tell you, even though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence he will get up and give him as much as he needs." Luke has laid out for us a really beautiful structure here. Remember, when you're reading the Gospels, it doesn't mean things are in order the way you're reading it. It means the writer has placed them in a particular order. They may be in chronological order. More times than not, they're not. And in Luke, in particular, Luke is just a literary artist. And he organizes thoughts. He'll take scenes from Jesus' life and organize them in an order that between he and God, they want them ordered, because he wants to make a point. And in Luke 11, we have this masterful scene on prayer. And there are 3 sections to this. The first section is the Lord's Prayer that we just read, the famous Lord's Prayer. The second section in this section of Luke is this parable of the friend at midnight. It's what we will focus on this morning. We will spend all our time on that. And then next week we'll look at the third section. It's this 3-stanza poem, where he says, "Ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door shall be open to you." And, no son asks his dad for an egg and he gets a scorpion, the breadstone, that whole deal. We'll look at that more next week. It's critical that you see all 3 together, and we'll look at that more. David Ackerman, who's been my pastor for, 30 plus years, has done by far the most masterful job on this passage I've ever seen. In fact, you can go to his website, Becoming What God Intended, if you've ever read the book. How many of you have ever read the book, his book, Becoming What God? Raise your hand a little higher. Yeah, so a bunch of you know this. Did he do this in the Ephesus group study too as well, or not? I don't know. The Lord's Prayer? Not yet, okay. Phenomenal. I would suggest you go there. I will not try to do what David did, because David was so masterful in the Lord's Prayer. But I'll sum it up by saying this. He describes the Lord's Prayer as really a set of issues that we're to work through in our time of prayer. And so really what the Lord's Prayer is, it's working through issues one at a time with God. And it starts with the most significant issue we have as people, which is to figure out how God and I exist together. It's really relating to God as my true and intended Father. And Ekman, the way he portrays this, and it's beautiful, is this is the first issue we really have to deal with. And it's a daily issue for us. Every day we come to God and we stop for it for a moment. We may do this over and over throughout the day. You may not get past the first issue, by the way. And we keep working through this idea of, God, are you my Father? You lose a job and you have to stop for a second and say, God, are you my Father? Are you going to father me? If you get to that point, then you work to the next issue. And the next issue, you work to the issue of daily sustenance. You work to the issue of having trouble forgiving somebody. Okay, I forgave him yesterday, but God, I'm mad at him again today. Okay, well, you probably did forgive him yesterday. That's irrelevant. Today you have to deal with it over again. So this idea of the Lord's Prayer is an issues-oriented prayer, working through all these sets of issues. It's really beautifully laid out. And then Jesus, from there, goes on to tell this particular parable. Just as a reminder, there are 4 sections to Luke, and I've been mentioning this. Luke starts with a section which is the birth and preparation of Jesus. We've seen all that. Then we went to the second section, where Jesus moves up to the Galilee region, in the triangle we called it. He dwells there for probably over 2 years, and this is where you see most of Jesus' miracles. He develops the relationships with the 12 guys. He pulls the 12 in. Just as significant as the 12 guys are these ladies that have really followed Jesus. They're in this tight group. He's got a little circle outside that group, and then big crowds. He does this ministry in the Galilee area. He finishes at the uttermost part of Israel, on Mount Hermon most likely, and then from the top of this area, as far north as you can get in Israel, it says he sets his face towards Jerusalem. And so we are now in this third section highlighted, often called the Jerusalem document. It's also called the Jerusalem travel narrative because Jesus has set his face to die. Jesus has set his face. Now, it doesn't to go to Jerusalem. It doesn't mean he's going straight there, obviously. It's not that long a walk. But he spends 9 months literally working his soul towards Jerusalem. And so everything changes. The way he talks changes. You see fewer and fewer miracles. You see way more heavy teaching. You see all of his parables, almost all of them come out during this time. And that's the section we're in. I also mentioned a few weeks ago that this travel narrative, this Jerusalem document, is actually, it's crazy. It's a giant poem from chapter 9 all the way to chapter 19. This is literally what it looks like. And the way this inversion works is every single passage, except for the very middle one, has a parallel passage. And so you can actually, if you know it's a poem, you can actually unlock one part of the text by looking at the other. In other words, this morning we are in Luke 11, that section highlighted in red on prayer. If you jump down to Luke 18, there's actually a parallel passage on prayer in the inversion poem, and understanding those and looking at them together will help you actually unlock one another. It's crazy what is involved in this. When you get to that Luke 18 passage, he actually, again, tells 2 parables like we're going to look at this morning and next week. 2 different audiences, one given to the disciples, one given to the Pharisees. We'll talk about that more next week as well. One of them is where, many of you are familiar with the parable. Remember the parable of the woman who goes to the judge and he won't help her, so she just bugs him to death until he finally gives in. And then there's the second passage where Jesus speaks to the Pharisees, and it's hilarious, pathetically hilarious, where there's a Pharisee. The parable is this Pharisee goes up onto the Temple Mount, and there's a tax collector over the corner beating his chest and praying. And the whole time the Pharisee is praying, he's thanking God. He's not like the tax collector. Anybody remember that story? We'll look at those in a couple months. We'll also look at them a little more next week because they're going to help us understand the passage next week. But it's really cool to look at those structures. The structure of this morning's parable is also a poem. And it's the same inversion, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, and it does it twice. There's literally two stanzas. And like all these poems, they're always on the outside. They have the same theme, so you can see on the outside they're both about kind of this idea of giving or answering a request, if you will. And the center of the poem is always the meat of the poem. It's always the point of the poem. And in this case, we'll be looking at that in this idea of shamelessness. The parable typically is called The Friend at Midnight. And it starts with an emphatic question that expects a negative answer. Can you imagine having a guest and going to a neighbor to borrow bread, and the neighbor offers ridiculous excuses about a locked door and sleeping kids? It is critical that we see this as a ridiculous set of excuses and a ridiculous question. The Middle Easterner would answer emphatically, I could never imagine the next door neighbor responding like that. And we should see it like that. The responsibility that a Middle Eastern person feels for a guest is absolutely legendary. And it is still like that today. If you go out into the desert of Israel and go into a Bedouin tent, they will treat you like you're the long-lost people. It is crazy hosting people, because theirs is not a guilt-based society like ours is. Theirs is an honor, shame-based society. So everything you do reflects on you and on how you treat the other person. So this idea of being responsible is huge, which is why they think these excuses are so ridiculous, which is exactly why Jesus tells this almost silly parable. Some quick thoughts on the setting of this. First of all, it says it took place at night, like the middle of the night. Well, I should caveat that. For me, this is the middle of the night. I don't know what you're like. For my daughter or son who go to bed at like 1 or 2 in the morning, this is like I still have a couple hours to brush my teeth. I don't know how old you are, but for me, I'm like sacked out. My wife and I had a bunch of stuff this weekend, and it was like we had a late breakfast, and we had all this stuff we had to do, and then it was like 4:30, and she said, "Let's just go to dinner now." I just said, I can't. She said, "Are you hungry?" I said, "I'm starving." It just felt like giving in. You know what I mean? My next door neighbors, they're like my second parents. They're 85. They go to dinner at 4 o'clock. They get there probably at 3:30. I don't care if I'm going to die. I'm not going to dinner at 4:30. Don't have me over dinner at 4:30. This is the same reason I don't take naps. To me, it's giving in. I'm still holding to the fact that I'm in my 40s. But for this guy, it truly is the middle of the night. It's midnight. And in a lot of the Middle East, they traveled at night because it was so hot. Places like Syria or Jordan, if you've ever been to Jordan. Egypt is like this. This is not the case in Israel. This is not the case in let's say, Lebanon. These are a little bit more mountainous areas, so you've got higher elevation, but you also have what we have here in the East Bay. We have a coastal breeze. Now, we don't think of ourselves that way, but we all know how the weather works here. It gets really hot, maybe at 95 to 100. It never lasts more than 3 or 4 days, because why? The fog comes in, the marine layer. It's exactly like that there. So think of here as there. And so this is really bizarre in Israel to have a guy show up at midnight. They didn't travel late at night because they've got coastal breezes. So that's one thing that's unusual. The second setting thing I'll highlight is this idea of bread. Every country in the Middle East does their bread differently. They're all different sizes and shapes. Like in Syria, they're very, very small loaves. So it would take like 3 loaves of bread to work through your meal. There are other countries, their bread is like flat, 2 feet long. Some of them are round. And they're all different. And in Israel, they're also very different. And a lot of times in these little villages in the first century, they would actually bake bread and keep it for a week. And so they would also, the women would a lot of times get together and do it together. It would be a communal thing. So they would actually help each other and bake their week's allotment of bread together, which meant when you had fresh bread, everybody in that little community knew you had fresh bread. They either helped you make it, they could smell it, they did it with you at the same time. They're all aware of what's going on. And you would never, in this case, give somebody a half a loaf of bread. They're not pre-sliced, they don't come in a plastic bag. You would never do this. This would be the greatest insult in the world. So when you get a loaf of bread, it's a round loaf, and you would always get a complete loaf. And you would never offer this broken loaf. And if you're asked to provide this, you must provide this. Ibrahim Said, who's an Arabic theological scholar, said this: the host has the responsibility of the magnanimous Oriental host to prepare to offer the guest that which is beyond his ability to provide. So what does this mean? When a guest in the Middle East comes to your house, they're not just your guest. They are guests of the community. They may be staying at your house, but that's not how it works. If they're staying at your house, they are assumed to be everybody's guest, which means it's everybody's responsibility to actually make sure that that guest is taken care of. The way the guest is treated in your home actually reflects on every single person in the community. Does that make sense? So if they come and you don't provide them the right meal, no matter what time they come, when they leave, they're going to say, wow, is that a crummy group of people? Not just is that a lousy house I went to, I wish I'd have gone to the other guy's house. They're going to assume everybody treated them poorly. And as long as the request is reasonable, it's granted. And in this case, what the guest asked the host for, and what the host is now asking the next door neighbor for, is the absolute bare minimum. I mean, the bread is not the meal. The bread is a lot more like the knife and the spoon and the fork by which you eat the meal. Now, of course, you eat the bread and you dip and scoop, but you would get your own loaf, you would break the bread, and then you would eat. So what this guy is asking his next door neighbor for is not like, the fatted calf. Does that make sense? He's asking him for the least thing possible, and everybody assumes that he would get it. And the host is confident, by the way, that he is going to have his request met when he goes next door at midnight. And he's confident he's going to get it because, first of all, he's not asking for himself. He's asking for his guest. Second of all, he knows that the host is going to get what he wants because what he wants and is asking for is actually reflected for the whole community. So he knows the friend next door is going to help him out because he knows it reflects on his friend how he responds. And he also knows he's going to get it because what he's asking for is the least of the meal. Now, some quick observations before we actually say, what does this parable mean? First of all, any Middle Eastern person listening to this story assumes that the host does not really have what he needs for the meal. He doesn't have the meal. Anybody listening to this assumes it's not just the bread he's missing. He doesn't have anything to provide this guy that he wants. Now, he most likely has stuff, but he doesn't have what the guest needs. And what do I mean by that? It's not that he doesn't have anything. It's that he doesn't have anything adequate enough to provide this guest that will reflect well on the community. Does that make sense? We've had some of the closest people we know that have come to this church. I've led the Journey class for 15 years. Some of my closest friends, most of my closest friends, came out of that Journey class that meets at 9 o'clock, or 9:15 actually is a better time. And if you want a further, deeper study, boy, get your fanny up there at 9:15. It's a great study. Derek's just finishing the book of Daniel. And unfortunately, I've had my heart ripped out because every time I get a close friend, they move. And so I've got still close friends here, but a lot of them have moved. We have friends, the Corrants moved to North Carolina, the Sutherlands moved to Montana. It just goes on. I mean, if I made the list, you would just go, wow, what's wrong with you? People want to get away with you so bad. Their friends moved to Colorado. Well, when they come into town, which they do sometimes, I just get frantic. I just can't wait to just cook the fatted calf for these people, right? So if the Corrants come from North Carolina, which they're going to, I'm very excited about this summer, and they come, and I say, and I go over to Derek and Diana's house, and I say, the Corrants showed up. I don't have anything to make them. Does that mean I have no food? It, of course, doesn't mean I have no food. I have food all over my house. It's just that Pop-Tarts aren't going to suffice. Well, actually, for John, they would suffice just fine. For Heidi, this is not going to suffice. So it also doesn't mean that I have nothing. I'm a peasant farmer. Of course I've got food. I've got great molasses, I've got cheese, I've got grains, I've got all kinds of things stored up. But I don't have anything adequate enough to serve this guest that's going to reflect well enough on the community. Does that make sense? So it's not that this guy doesn't have anything. He doesn't have anything that really is going to express the love and the hosting deeply enough for this other person to really feel like they're getting what they want. Also, the host is not borrowing anything. The host isn't coming over to say, when he says, can I borrow 3 loaves of bread? This is ridiculous. We know that. If I go to the Grassi's house and I say, can I borrow a teaspoon of sugar? Do I have any intention of paying back? I'm going to drive across town and say, here's your teaspoon of sugar back. Will I do that? No. The answer is no. Let me just let you know. Plus, I won't be able to do that because her sugar came from France, and I'm never going to be able to repay her sugar, and she's going to have 7 kinds of sugar, all different colors, milled by, peasants from some village. I'm not exaggerating, am I? Not at all. What's the inference if I say, can I borrow some bread? Can I borrow a cup of sugar? What am I inferring? What's that? Can I have some? And more than likely, if you need something, I'm here for you. I'm going to give you sugar if you ever come to my house. It's just not going to be from France. Not at all. More like Bakersfield, probably, is where my sugar is going to come from. So now, whenever I've heard this story on this parable, I've always heard that the purpose of this parable is one thing. What is it? What is the point that we've been taught that this parable is about? Persistence. I've never heard this taught any other way, which of course is exactly what we're not going to do. Every time I've ever heard this story, I've heard this is about a guy who's in his house, a guest comes, he doesn't know what to give him, he doesn't have enough to give him, he goes next door to his friend makes up all kinds of excuses, so he just beats the door down until the guy finally gives in, he's persistent, and then the takeaway that I always have from this is that I'm supposed to be persistent in prayer. And the theology is fantastic. I do think the Bible teaches that we're to keep coming to God. I think we will see in Luke in a matter of weeks where we're asked to keep coming to God. Unfortunately, I just don't think this parable has anything to do with being persistent in prayer. So, why? Why do I think that? For two reasons. Number one, there's really a pretty lousy mistranslation in a lot of our Bibles. Look at verse 8. Verse 8 typically reads this: I tell you, even though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. Almost all scholars, and I've read a billion, that are worth their weight, agree across the board that this word does not, in the Greek, mean persistence. A way better translation for this word is actually shamelessness, or shameless. And for hundreds and hundreds of years after Jesus spoke these words, it was translated as shameless. And then around the 12th century, the church got so uncomfortable with this word. It's such a negative word, being shameless. It just has such a bad feeling to it. And then how do I apply this to prayer? That they literally morphed it into persistence. It became much more comfortable. But the problem is, it doesn't mean that in any stretch or form. Again, the theology is fine, but that's not what this parable is saying. The verse should literally be translated, I tell you, even though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his shamelessness, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. Now here's a really crazy twist to this. I was going through this, and there's actually a shade difference between the way the classical Greek defines this word and the way the common Greek defines this word. And they're really, really crazy. The way the classical word reads, it's a sense of shamelessness, but it's a sense of shamelessness from being obnoxious. In the common Greek, it's a little different. In the common Greek, the sense of shamelessness is actually being brazen. So one is being brazen, one is being obnoxious, and they're both to do with being shameless. More on that in just a minute. The second reason I think this has nothing to do with persistence is there's nothing in this parable that even has one speck of persistence in it. Not one. In the parable, he never mentions the host asking more than once, does he? Never once does it say he asked more than one time. He didn't even knock, for heaven's sake. Remember, in the Middle East, they have windows, but there's no glass. They're not like our homes. Our homes are... We slept last night. I love these. We replaced our skylights with ones that open now. You can actually hit a remote, and they all open. It cools the house up so great. You got to do this. We never run our air conditioning anymore. And we have the windows open. The ones that Linda feels are 20 feet high where the burglars can't come in. It drives me crazy. Because for me, I'd rather just die by a robber than sit and sweat in my bed. But that's a whole other topic. That's another discussion that we'll have on a side topic. Which, there's going to be some bad discussions at home after this. Not in my home. Not in my home. Because I live, so I know how this goes. So, we have the windows open, and it's about 6:30, and all of a sudden I hear pounding. They're landscaping the backyard on a Sunday morning at 6:30 in the morning. I was just like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I had to get up at 7, look at my notes, and pray and stuff. Anyway, so up I get, and I'm closing windows because I'm trying to make it quiet. This is not a Middle Eastern home that I'm living in, by the way. They have no glass, right? So if you come at midnight in a country where people don't normally travel this late, this is really bizarre. If you go to your neighbor and start knocking on the door, you're going to scare him to death. He's your friend. You would not do that. So all it says is he speaks to him. Do you notice that? And he doesn't say it 2 times, 3 times, 4. He does it just one time. And by the way, the passage says the host gives him an answer right away. So there's no feeling of resistance, let alone the fact that the word does not mean that. So the question then is, what is this parable really calling us to? And then, once we understand what the parable is calling us to, what does this have to do with the Lord's Prayer that sits right above it, the way Luke has laid this out? We'll look at those two one at a time. First of all, I think, obviously in this parable, we're the host. And God is, if you will, the sleeping friend. Now, it's a parable. There are not one-for-one relationships. So don't draw theology from this. It's not theological. It's a story that's there to grip your emotions and your soul. So it's not like you can infer from this, oh, is God asleep sometimes? I have to wake him up. You're going too far. Does God have kids now that I'm not aware of? So don't go crazy with parables. Let the parable wash over you, and let the characters represent somebody, but don't go too crazy with the characters. Does that make sense? So we are the host clearly in this. And the message Jesus is giving us about prayer is to us about ourselves and about God next door, if you will. What it's saying to us, I think, very clearly and obviously is he's asking us to come to him shamelessly. But not just without shame. Oh no. God is actually telling us to come, listen to this, some of you are really, really not going to like this, which is why it's fun, with a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness. This is what Jesus is calling us to in this parable. He is asking us to come to his Father with a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness. And if you are like me and you know anything about God, your shoulders should be pinned up to your earlobes right now. When I think about what I'm like, when I think about the stuff that I do, when I think about just the thoughts that enter my mind on an ongoing basis, you know, in the last week's talk, when I think about how many times God just taps me on the shoulder to beckon me to live for him and to love another human being, and because it's not convenient, I step around the person, like the Levi and the priest did. When I think of all these things, this just sounds crazy. God, you're asking me, not somebody else. This is Mother Teresa. You're asking Doug McBride to come to you in a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness. It just makes me squirm. I think what this really requires is an absolute transparency. To be brazen is to be transparent. I was sitting with a group of people a few weeks ago at a barbecue, and there was a gal there, and I can't say who she is because she's here this morning, and I just love this gal. I mean, and my friends love this gal. And what I love about her is she's just never somebody else. She's just present. She doesn't care what it looks like. She's just herself. She's brazen. And I mean that in the most complimentary way. So we're sitting around a circle, and we're just talking about kids and parenting and this and that. She steps up, she goes, yeah, she goes, you know, my God, my kids sometimes just drive me crazy. And she said, but the problem is, what she was describing was, you know, they do stuff, and I tell them like 4 or 5 times, over and over, but they just don't do it. And then I just lose it. I just get so upset with myself. Why do I do this? And she's just laying her intestines out in front of all of us. And I'm thinking, you are so cool. Just a brazen transparency. She's looking at me saying, like, what do I do? I don't know how to... It wasn't so much about her kids not doing something after saying the same thing 4 or 5 times. The story was about her. Why do I let this get to me? Why do I parent this way? Why don't I parent differently? I just sat there. I was in awe. This is a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness. This is a transparency that says, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And this is what God is saying to you and I. Come to me like that. The other thing I think this parable does is it tells us something about the nature of God. You know, if you think about this poor host, everything is working against this guy, right? Everything. It's the middle of the night. His friend is asleep. His door is locked shut. His kids are asleep. Everything in this post-life is working against him. Does that sound familiar? It is to this person, it is to us, when everything seems like it's working against us. When we feel, listen to this, in the moment, when we feel like I have sinned so bad. I have so much stuff in my past. You have no idea, God. You're asking someone to come to you that is not worthy to come to you. If you had any idea how little I know about this Christian thing, about this Bible thing, about you, God, I don't even know what you're like. I can't follow this stuff. My faith is so inconsistent. You're asking me to come to you. God, I'm so cold. God, I can't make relationships work. God, I can't make my marriage work. Everything working against you. And God looks at you in the eye and says, come with a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness to me. Because that's the part in you that I want. Isn't that crazy? If there's not a part of your ice cube inside that's not melting, wow. I don't know what else to tell you. This is the person that God calls. I would translate it this way. He would get up for a friend, but let's say for argument's sake, they aren't friends. He will still get up because he has integrity, and he has honor, and he digs you. You see, he is his friend, and he will get up just because of that. But just for argument's sake, if you don't think that's enough, God has integrity. He'll do the right thing. He knows what you need. And this to me is really incredible when you understand this. And then you stick it underneath the Lord's Prayer. And you ask yourself, why would Luke place this story here underneath this Lord's Prayer? You see, in the Lord's Prayer, we're called to work through a set of issues, right? Work all through, all the way down to our daily needs. All the way down to, I can't seem to forgive this other person. We're to work through those daily issues, but we're to start with addressing God as our true and intended Father. But if you're also like me, you might hear all of that, and here He's your intended Father, and say, yes, but is He approachable? I know I'm supposed to come to Him as my Father. I know I'm supposed to ask Him for my daily bread. I know I'm supposed to come to Him and ask Him to help me forgive those who have trespassed against me the way He has forgiven me. I know I'm supposed to work through these things, but can I even approach Him to begin with, given who I am? And it's to this person who is supposed to come to the Father as their true and intended Father that Jesus says, and you do it with a brazen, obnoxious shamelessness, because He is your friend, and He loves you, and He digs you, and He'll treat you well. Amen? Amen. That should melt us. That should cause us to come to Him. That should take a guy like Doug McBride, who doesn't even pray consistently, and say, that is where I'm welcome. Any day of the week. Father, if we just sit for a moment in the quietness of our own soul, if we look at ourselves with but a moment of honesty, we are exposed. Thank you that in this moment, at your feet, this exposure inside us is where we're most welcome. You are our true Father. And we come to you knowing you will treat us with integrity and honor, and that you love us,
so that we can now come to you brazenly, obnoxiously, unashamed. And we love you for it.